I'd like to call to order the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, December 3rd, 2013. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Schron. Mr. Schron is absent for the moment. Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent for the moment. Mr. Jones. Here. Mr. Rogers. Here. Ms. Simon. Here. Mr. Greenspan. Here. Mr. Miller. Here. Mr. Brady. Here. Mr. Germana. Here. Mr. Gallagher. Here. Ms. Conley.
Here.
There's a quorum.
And did anyone sign in for public comment related to the agenda?
Madam Chair, no one has signed in to speak.
All right, item 4, matters referred to the committee. Do you want to read the item, please?
Resolution number 2013-0244, a resolution authorizing a termination and transfer agreement with Merchandise Mart Properties Incorporated, MMPI Cleveland Development LLC, and Cleveland MMCC LLC, authorizing other actions related to the agreement, authorizing the county executive to execute the agreement and all other documents consistent with this resolution, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
All right, I believe that Mr. Applebaum is here, and he has a presentation to make, so I'd like to call him forward. And there is an amendment to the resolution. Do I need to make this amendment before we start?
Madam Chair, first you need to have a motion and a second to bring it up on the floor.
Okay. Is there a motion? So moved. Mr. Rogers, seconded by Mr. Germana. All right. And do I need to do the amendment now? Go ahead.
It's up
Go
to
ahead
you.
and start, and we'll do the amendment afterwards.
Thank you. So I believe from our last meeting together, there were a couple of issues that you had asked that I address with respect to the termination and transfer agreement.
Okay.
And you also requested that I have bond counsel here available, which I do. If you guys want to come up for a second, I'll introduce you.
Okay, just for the record and for people listening, so this is the agreement that will end our relationship with MMPI and transfer to new ownership. Is that right?
That's correct.
In a nutshell. Okay.
And
we have to vote on this and approve the final document for that termination.
This is, that's correct,
Okay.
yes. And so the two, first of all, we have here from Squire Sanders, David Goodman, and David Goodman's lawyer, Kate Tompkins, as I like to say, but they're both.
Well, it's obvious the women know, you know.
That's right, bond counsel, and the two specific issues I recall that you wanted addressed, and I believe one issue, and I recall that Councilman Jones wanted to comment on this, was the specific reason why. Well, let me take a step back. We were actually discussing a couple things on the termination and transfer agreement. One issue was this issue of governance and control. And the question was, why did we have to have a separate entity? And what is the degree of control? What's the test, or what are the standards for control of that entity? Now, there were suggestions that we received from council about the Articles of Incorporation and about the Code of Regulations. We have made certain modifications to those documents, and I believe you now have the revised documents with the red line. But if you, I don't know, David or Kate, if you want to just step forward first of all and just briefly address the question of why we have the technical reasons from a bond counsel perspective of why we have the separate entity and what the issue of control is. That would be helpful.
We'd be happy to. Good morning, members of council. When the entire financing structure for the financing of the Convention Center and Global Center for Health Innovation was established, the financing vehicle was for the county to issue bonds secured by a pledge of its non-tax revenues. In order for the payments that were ultimately initially derived from the county, then paid back in the form of rent from the private developer, MMPI, to become non-tax revenues, obviously there had to be an entity other than the county that was the recipient of those payments, which was in turn then obligated to pay a portion of those payments back so that they could be used to make those payments of principal and interest to the bondholders. Even as MMPI is being extricated from that structure, it remains essential for there to be an other entity to whom the county makes those initial payments, and which is then in turn obligated to make the payments back to the county so that they retain their character as non-tax revenues, which is legally important to the county for a multitude of reasons, that there not be any basis on which that limitation on the source of payment could be challenged or questioned. There are no absolute bright line tests to establish the degree of independence, but it does have to be an autonomous and separate entity from the county so that there's no risk that the county could be challenged as simply moving the money from, in effect, one county pocket to another. So we have provided some guidance based on parallel comparable areas of law where some such separation is required. We've reviewed the drafts of the governing documents for the entity that is proposed to take the place of MMPI. We're comfortable that the degree of control that the county would establish under that for various appointments, requirements for supermajority for certain actions and so on, are not a level of control that should give anybody a basis for saying that this is simply an agency or an alter ego of the county, but that's the reason that a separate entity is required. There was obviously no concern that MMPI, which was a for-profit company in which there was no direct level of control, satisfied that, but since the county will have some involvement at a higher level with this new entity, that was the reason for that level of concern.
All right, questions?
Thank you.
I know when he's not here. Okay.
I'll bring bond counsel back anytime you like, by the way, for these types of explanations. So there's another issue we're going to have bond counsel address in a minute, but that was the technical response. So in connection with our moving forward with the termination and transfer agreement, what we have to do is, once we have consensus on there's some governance issues that we've talked about, I'm sure we'll come back to that in a minute. Our steps are as follows. We will go ahead and incorporate this new entity, I can't remember exactly what we called it, but basically the Cuyahoga County Convention Facilities Development Corporation. Then we will, under the termination transfer agreement, the MMPI contract, there'll be an assignment to that entity. They will hold the contract with SMG and will proceed. So those are the steps right now. So I guess the other question then before you is any other issues or concerns with respect to what we've done with the Articles of Incorporation and the Code of Regulations. So I think that there was some further discussion that you wanted to have with respect to that. We have made the modifications that you have requested that I received from council, and I think the modification that is still under discussion, I believe, is Mr. Miller's suggestion about, and I'm not exactly, I think you have some new language on that, so I think that's where we're at on that, as I recall.
Yes, Mr. Brady.
I think this may be part and parcel to Councilman Miller's interest concerns. Could you just very quickly remind the council how the governing structure is set up and how the temporary nature of it, and just
Yes. So the concept, and we've made it a little clearer in the red line that you now have, is we are in order to have this process proceed. We have this entity, the Cuyahoga County Convention Facilities Development Corporation. The idea is that we would establish an initial board. It's an interim temporary board, which will have 3 appointees. One appointed by the county executive, one appointed by President of Council, and one which is a joint appointment of the Greater Cleveland Partnership and Positively Cleveland, with the understanding that the next move that this group has to make requires the consent. It's a majority, but in that majority you must have both of the county appointees have to agree. The idea is then that once you have the initial appointment, the final governance structure, which is to say that the size of the board and the appointees will be within the responsibility of that board, but there must be agreement of both council or both county appointees. And the concept there, and we've talked about whether this is a 5-person, 7-person, 9-person board, but that's something that will be taken up by that interim board. We've also put in the regulations that there's critical issues that will be decided ultimately by the directors, and we've indicated that certain of the critical issues the county appointees have to have a say in, have to both vote for, and those are listed in Section 8 of the Code of Regulations. And one of them that we've said rises to that level would be the selection and or termination of the corporation's chief paid manager. The idea is there'll probably be there'll be a executive director, separate from the board. And that selection is also something that the county appointees would have to agree upon. The question of what this board will do, essentially, the most critical thing is manage they'll have the SMG contract, they oversee that, they manage it, and then and they will be reporting back to the county on financial issues, and ultimately, this is the forum where they will conduct the meetings, that involve the convention center, the Global Center, the hoteliers, Positively Cleveland, in terms of policy going forward, but always accountable by contract to the county. And there's a series of agreements that MMPI formerly had that now will be the responsibility of this entity to honor contractual obligations to the county. So, I mean, that's in a nutshell what we're talking about here.
All right, Mr. Miller, did you have a question?
Not at this time.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Greenspan?
Great, thank you. This may be a question to the law director, but are we doing 2 things with this single resolution? Number one, dealing with the MMPI agreement, and secondarily, creating this separate entity?
We are not creating this entity. This entity is being created separately by Thompson Hine. The resolution is basically providing, as part of the transfer, the format of this entity and the governing board. But the entity, we don't want to even have the appearance that we are specifically creating that entity. That entity is being created on its own accord. We're just providing for the governance as part of the transfer.
To add to that, if I may, we are creating, the entity is going to be created. Now, ultimately, though, you are going to make the decision as to the termination and transfer agreement. If you don't like the entity that we create, you may not pass the termination and transfer agreement. So you're basically giving us guidance as to the type of entity that you will find acceptable. But your action is not required to create the entity. The entity will be created, but we're basically getting your guidance, because if you ultimately don't like the nature of the entity that's created, if you don't like the structure, if you don't like the structure of the board, your determination would be not to vote for the termination and transfer agreement. So that's why the information's in front of you, but it technically requires no action from you to create the entity, nor would we want there to be action by you to create the entity, because it has to be independent.
Well, and I understand better now, after we talked after the meeting about the original formation and how the bond was issued and it was a loan and so forth. I understand that, but I guess my point is then under the now therefore Section 2, we are creating by this legislation an interim board. And I guess that's my point. You know, by our charter, our legislation can only deal with single subject. And my concern is we're creating a dual subject piece of legislation.
It is the same subject, though, that you're terminating the agreement and you're providing the terms under which the agreement is terminated. And one of the terms under which it's terminated is that it's transferred to this entity with that governing board. Again, you're not creating the board. The board is being created separately.
Well, then what is
You're not creating the entity. The articles of incorporation, all of that stuff is being filed separately. You're agreeing that that's the entity under those terms. You're agreeing to the transfer.
But by us legislatively determining that this board shall consist of 3 members, then aren't we, in fact, mandating the structure of this company, of this entity?
Those are two. I mean, you are in some respect, but what I'm saying is it's within the same subject, which is the subject is the termination and transfer and the conditions under which the termination and transfer would happen. If you would segregate the subject into this minutia, you would never. I mean, every piece of legislation you'd have to break it into. You're not as part of this legislation creating something about a labor agreement. You're within the confines of that subject on which you're legislating, which is the termination and transfer, and it's the conditions for that transfer.
I mean, I'm going to have to defer, bond counsel, if you're satisfied, with bond counsel and however you're structuring this doesn't break that barrier you're trying to protect, I'll rely on that. I understand the intent is to segregate the liability, but does this bridge that?
And let me be very clear. I mean, this was not language that was actually even put by the law department. This was language that council wanted in there. Our preference is our resolution. All that stuff happens in the whereas clause. But if there's an issue with it, it's not the one subject rule. I mean, the issue with it becomes the control issue. The part that worries me is the control issue, not the one subject rule. The one subject rule, you're still within the same broad subject for which the piece of legislation is there.
So I guess my question's still on the floor. Is bond counsel satisfied that this legislation does not pierce the corporate veil insofar as commingling or providing any?
Thanks,
That is a
Councilman
separate
Greenspan. With both deference and agreement, we concur in the law director's assessment that this they do relate to a single subject. You are not effectively, as Mr. Applebaum said, directly creating the entity. You're defining the circumstances under which that entity will satisfy this council's and the county's requirements. And so we would not raise any objection about its being subject to challenge on that basis.
Okay. Make sure we're covered.
All right, Ms. Simon has a question.
Thank you, Madam President. Just for clarification, I just heard the purpose of forming this board was for liability purposes, but what I heard earlier, it's more to ensure that the flow of revenue is characterized appropriately. Is that correct, the latter versus the former, or both?
In my view, we rely on bond counsel and it's the flow of funds. I mean, whether there is, the issue of liability you could talk about, because at the end of the day, yes, there is some liability that this board takes on, but they look to SMG with respect to management responsibility. They look to the county with respect to financial responsibility. So while there's an element of a party that takes liability and takes responsibility, I think it all goes back to the overall financial structure and the independence. I guess it's a little of both.
So what's the anticipated life of this board?
Well, at this point in time, the anticipated life, well, let me say two things about that. The anticipated life of the board certainly is at a minimum for the duration of the bonds themselves, at a minimum. It is our hope and expectation that this board proves to be a very successful model, that it takes responsibility, it takes some burden that maybe the county would have otherwise had, and it works very successfully. And because of its own success and its own creation of value, it will be beyond the life of the bonds. It may even serve other functions ultimately, as we've alluded to the possibility of a different function, although we don't need to decide that today.
Any other questions?
Madam President, just not to belabor, this new organization that's being formed, what's its structure, corporate structure, meaning it's 501c?
Well, it is right now. It's a not-for-profit corporation, and we have indicated it is not necessary that it become a 501c4, but we're going to apply for that because there may be benefits to it. But if we didn't get that, it frankly would not have a negative impact. But we see some possible benefits, so we will file for that application. But so that's not necessary, but it could be an added benefit. So it's been set up so it can in fact be receive that status, and there's some you'll notice that there's language in the documents that set it up that way, or set it up for the possibility of achieving tax-exempt status.
So from here, this resolution's adopted.
Excuse me?
Assuming this resolution's adopted, this is the enabling legislation
Yes.
that transfers the bond over to the new entity. Then the 3-member board is put in place.
Yes.
Under this new entity.
Yes.
And they meet, they set the rules, the objectives, and so forth for the organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then how soon is the timeline for all this to take place?
Well, actually, that's a good question, and we think that you will control that answer. As you may recall, I mean, there was some discussion about this. We originally wanted to put a very short timeline on this, and we were advised to be careful of that because council wants to make sure it has adequate time to deliberate on whoever it assigns as its member of this board. So I think that we'd actually like your guidance, because we want to be able to instruct the third party as to what we think the timeline should be. So I guess in some ways it's sort of up to you, because I think that your timeline in terms of assigning the board member may possibly be the longest. We want to do it as quickly as we can, but we want to make sure that you have the time and the ability to make the selection of your board member. And then, of course, the question is how long it takes that board to set up the rules. But our thought process is that should be done within, at a maximum, 3 to 6 months. That's our thought process. The sooner the better.
So if I can just continue. So the only, I'm just trying to once again just get the separation here. So the only thing council, once this is adopted, council, or this actually just says the president shall appoint, I believe. But knowing our president, she would seek advice from council. Mm-hmm. Is that our only involvement? No,
because what will then occur, well, I'll be careful about this. It is anticipated that when the ultimate board is selected, or the method for selection of the ultimate board, it is anticipated that a majority of those board members will be selected by council, and then you, of course, will have a role in the selection of the ultimate board members. And that will be your next mission with respect to this. It is also anticipated that there will be, as part of what this board does, there will be, and there is a robust reporting process. You will have contracts with the board, and at an appropriate point in time, because all those contracts with MMPI now have been restated, it'll be important for you then to come back and think about, what does this board owe county council, because there are obligations, and you're, of course, going to be reviewing their obligations to the county. And so you'll have a continuous process of reviewing what they do, reviewing information, but you're going to select the first board member, then you will be involved in selecting the ultimate board members, and then you'll be involved in the information flow because you'll have contracts with the board. You will have contracts with the board and what they have to do on behalf of the county, for the county. So you'll have an oversight function.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? As the legislation is currently circulated, there are no amounts for the termination agreement or for, what is this, a software licensing? And there's an amendment that's been circulated, Amendment 8th, whereas clause included. I'd like to move that we amend the resolutions to reflect these numbers. Currently, the resolution has blanks, and this would fill in the numbers for the actual amounts for the terminations. Or second, you want to move I moved a second, okay. Any discussion on that? Mr. Applebaum, do you want to give us the background on that?
Yes, there are two series of costs involved there, and once again, I believe these are still stated as not to exceeds because every day the precise number varies a little bit depending on the exact day of the transfer, as there's a continual expenditure of funds. So the smaller number, the $500,000, that's actually the amount that MMPI is required to set aside out of the money it otherwise would have received to pay for a series of transactional costs. This is 4 months of oversight by conventional wisdom because they actually in the last 4 months took over the management of the facility during the transition. That final amount will be in the vicinity of $150,000. Then there are all of the transition costs that involve legal and consulting to legal, and we're still verifying that final amount. We're going to reconcile that with Majid, but the hold number on that's $350,000, and that's the 500 for everything involved, literally for the last year in doing this transaction. But that comes out of MMPI, money that MMPI otherwise would have had. The larger number involves a series of capital costs. The biggest part of that, and these are simply costs that it could have been done one of two ways. These are tenant improvement expenses, things that are now being expended for tenant build-out, which we're now taking over but getting the revenue. The biggest part of this is for equipment, kitchen equipment. There's about $1.5 million, which is kitchen equipment, which, by the way, we're getting, that could have been funded through the construction cost. We're actually receiving from MMPI $4 million in return of contingency. If MMPI had simply expended those dollars, there's simply been less contingency. So this is simply it's a funding mechanism, but contingency dollars will be used to reimburse everything but the TI expense. And this would have been an MMPI expense out of contingency. This is just a way of reconciling the books. So there's and all of that, most of those dollars simply involve costs that are going back into the building. So there are costs for materials, there's some architectural cost with build out. There are, like I said, food service costs, and simply the reimbursement of costs. And on the TI, on the tenant improvement, the reason that the number's not certain is every day there are more bills for tenant improvement, and whatever day, when we transfer, assuming we transfer on the 12th, by way of example, on that very day, all bills before that will be reimbursed. All bills after that will start to pay directly, but we'll have all the revenue and all the income and stop paying rent. So that's the nature of that number. And we've gone through it, we've audited it, and we've had challenges in those numbers. So those numbers have varied, but we're pretty much through that entire process. I will say this though, this deal is subject to audit. So On certain of these expenses, we have requested some additional backup information from MMPI. So it's still subject to our final review of documentation. And even if we closed, if we didn't get that, if some of that documentation turned out to be improper, we would have a hold. We have a hold on those dollars. But it should be, assuming we close by the 12th, that'll all be done.
Right,
Madam
question?
Chairperson.
Yes.
I'd just like to commend Mr. Applebaum for all the work. I know you've been working on this all year long, and looks like we're about to successfully conclude this one part of the business, but a very important part. And also, to the council, this has been structured in a way so that the council, does not inadvertently get cut out of the loop. We have a secure spot on this board, and we have what is essentially, along with the administration, control of the board in this initial phase. And since the public is putting up millions, tens of millions of dollars for the project, I think that's appropriate. And so I want to commend the administration as well on this approach. And I'd like to move this legislation forward. It's been working its way through the system for quite some time, and obviously we need to move on it now. And although I'm not assuming there are no more questions, but I'm not hearing any.
Can you hold that till we vote on the amendment?
Sure.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to adopt the proposed resolution as circulated, which includes the amounts. Is there any discussion on the amendment? All right, all those in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The resolution is so amended. Now, Mr. Brady then has moved that we move this to the full council for a vote.
Madam
Yes.
President, I still want to offer an amendment.
Okay.
Madam President, I'd like to offer an amendment to require that this operating entity operate in an open and public manner. I'm always reluctant to give authority over to unelected boards appointed from various different places. I think it's very difficult to achieve accountability, but that we should at least require that they follow an open process. And I've been working with the law director on language, and the closest I can get at this point is the following. The amendment would read as follows. The articles of incorporation of the operating company and any of its successors and assigns shall require its board to operate in a manner that corresponds with the Cuyahoga County Code relating to open meetings and public records, except that these articles may allow some board members attending a meeting properly noticed for a designated time and place to attend and participate by phone, video conference, or other electronic means. So that's my motion.
Just for sake of clarification, where would you put this as another paragraph then, another section?
This would be included as a new section at whatever place would be deemed appropriate.
So I assume it would be after section 4?
That would be fine.
I'll second that motion.
All right, any discussion on this? And I'd like to hear from the law department.
The concern that we've had with this is obviously the concern that why we have bond counsel here is this issue, and the issue that Councilman Greenspan raises, is the level of control that you have over this entity. If we could automatically do all of this ourselves as the county, we would have done it ourselves. We've gone through this entire process to create this entity because we need this other private entity in between. And there is no bright line. I mean, I don't, even bond counsel, I would venture to say, can't give you the exact bright line at what point that control steps over. It's a continuum, and every other step that you put in there, you're exerting a little bit more control, and who knows at the end of the day, what that determination is. So obviously, we were promising Councilman Miller that, the Articles of Incorporation will say, we were trying to avoid the mandatory obligation out of the legislation, provided that the Articles of Incorporation are going to do that, that the members will voluntarily agree to do that, that this entity that's being created by Mr. Applebaum will provide that in its Articles of Incorporation. So that's the primary concern, is over, jeopardizing, and I know the term financing is not necessarily the right, but jeopardizing the entire scheme that we're trying to do by putting too much in our legislation. The other practical concern is, and I think we've addressed it a little bit here, is, this is a board that is going to have, skeletal staff. This is not a board that, this is not a large entity with, if you think of the county, we have a Department of Communications. Each department has its, officers who handle public records, who handle. You want its records to be open. You want it to have open meetings, but there are limitations to how much an entity of that nature can do. You want to notice the meetings and everybody to attend to make the records available. But if you have it comply everything with the county code, our code, you have to produce the records promptly. You have to produce them. The 3 cents on the production. All these things add up. But and the other concern is the board members, if they need to attend by video conference. I give you an example. For instance, I sit on the board on the Bar Association's board of trustees. Our meetings are open, and all members of the board of the Bar Association can attend. But we just voted on our budget by email. It was presented at a public meeting. Everybody was able to attend the meeting, and discussions happen in a public meeting. But this happens in a lot of boards where you're able to vote by email or things of that nature. This would prevent it. So those are some of the practical implications of this amendment. You don't want to handicap an entity of that nature by those limitations. I was trying to maybe add the word generally before corresponds, to just say generally corresponds to the Cuyahoga County Code, because everybody agrees we want this board to operate in open. We want this board to be, we want the records to be available in a reasonable manner. But our code is even a lot more strict than the state code, and this entity is not anticipated to have a large staff or anything of that nature. Those were some of the concerns that we were having. And that's a lot of the negotiations back and forth is what it was about.
So if you wanted to add the word generally, it would give us some leeway in terms of variations?
That would give some leeway, at least in the it doesn't necessarily resolve the control issue per se, but at least it gives some leeway in terms of this nimble entity being able to operate with some flexibility.
All right, Mr. Germain has a question.
Madam Chair, I'm a little bit confused because I wasn't under the impression that Thompson-Hines is prescribing this, and are we adopting this?
This being, no, the Code of Regulations and the
Articles of
No.
Incorporation?
The Thompson-Hines is forming the Articles of Incorporation. Council's being provided with, because we're transferring to that new entity, that council is comfortable with the governance of that new entity and its Code of Regulations. So those were being provided to council to review. Now, there are some protections in terms of how they can be changed, who can vote on it, the need for the county representatives to be able to have a majority to agree to change the Code of Regulations, but their council is not voting on the Articles of Incorporation or on the Code of Regulations.
So that's to my point. I don't know how we could be amending this if we're not. It's being done separate. I think I agree with Councilman Miller and the law director that this is the way we want them to proceed, but I can't see how we could amend this if drawing them up.
Madam President,
Mr. Miller?
to answer that question, this provision
Go into the resolution.
does not amend the proposed articles of incorporation or the rules of procedure, which haven't even been adopted yet. All it does is creates a paragraph in the transfer agreement saying that the operating entity's articles of incorporation shall include this provision that in most respects it's going to comply with the open meetings and public records provisions.
Mr. Miller, do you have this in writing?
I do, but just one hand scratch copy because Majid and I have been working back and forth.
Well, I'm kind of concerned about it. I don't have it in writing. I can't see it. I understand the gist of this. Is it possible to move this forward? You circulate your amendment, and we can do your amendment consider your amendment at the meeting on the 10th? Because I just don't feel comfortable. I mean, I haven't seen it. I've just, I basically agree with the gist of it, but I think that in the interest of time, if you circulate, let's move this forward to the meeting of the 10th. You circulate your amendment. Everybody can have an opportunity to look at it. We can put it in the context and approve it at that point or vote, up or down. But I think there's probably mostly support for it, but I think we'd like to see it.
President, I agree with that. And I'd like to see how this entity would interface with the state ethics or ethics ordinance as it stands now, and maybe just generally referencing those. So I want to see something in writing.
Okay.
Okay. So there was no motion for it, and there was no second, so. Oh, okay.
Withdraw my second.
Okay. All right. Is there any other questions or discussion on moving the amended resolution 2013-0244 for the termination agreement forward for a meeting? Will that be under suspension of the rule? Will that be under suspension of the rule for the meeting of December 10th? And this is very time sensitive, that we have to have it on the 10th. And then we'll consider Mr. Miller's motion if it comes forward. Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Just for consideration, I don't know if the law department could figure this out, but if the amendment does come forward at our December 10th meeting, it seems to me that if we're able to, within our termination agreement terms, say that the Articles of Incorporation must include this, what are the limitations of those types of terms? So if we can, if it's ruled that it's okay for us to say that the articles must address the idea of open meetings, is there some level of limitation on how far we can go with identifying what terms we would want in the articles?
Yeah, and just for clarity, Jeff is pointing this out, the termination transfer agreement has been completely negotiated with MMPI. It's been signed by MMPI. You don't want to open the Pandora's box and go renegotiate that agreement. I think what we're talking about is, Jeff works for us. He's writing the Articles of Incorporations. Somebody has to sign us the legal form and correctness of the documents finally, and that they're in their course. So anything would be done separately by Jeff in the Articles of Incorporation as opposed to reopening that agreement. And quite frankly, what's the value of, if the agreement is with MMPI, this is something governing a new entity
Madam
altogether.
Chairperson,
Yes, Mr. Brady.
I think that there's support on the council for this concept, and there's no question about that. The question is whether it's appropriate for us to put language in this legislation, and there seems to be a little bit of uncertainty about that, and this deal is too big for there to be uncertainty about it. Now, if the council president is going to appoint herself or one other member of the council to sit on this board, is there any member of this board who's opposed? Is there any member of this council who's opposed to open meetings? Because that member being on the board will be able to assure that the meetings are open to the extent that it's practical. And to the extent it's not practical, I would assume that board would go into executive meetings if they have issues that are too sensitive to be in public meetings, and that we would have authority over that through our appointee. And so while I completely support the concept, I don't, I think we've already got the influence we need to make this happen in the legislation as it's drawn up.
I agree with that. I mean, I think we're kind of muddying the water at this point, trying to add another amendment to it. I mean, we're certainly not here to have anything contrary than what we've always had in terms of public meetings. So is there still any opposition to this going forward? And if we can still consider the amendment at the 10th?
I was just going to, I've looked at this, and let me offer the following.
Okay.
Because I think there's a couple things you could do here.
Okay.
The one thing we don't want to do, trust me, we don't want to tinker with the termination and transfer agreement. We especially don't want to tinker with it after we've talked about the economic benefit to us. We have it signed by MMPI. We don't want them to relook at that agreement. We could do, and I don't think this requires, if you pass it, it doesn't require anything to change the termination and transfer agreement. This is just in your resolution. We can do, I think we can do a few things. Number one, if you wanted to pass this today, you could. I think the word generally suggested by the law the law director would give comfort.
Yeah, I can't pass something I've never seen.
I understand that. Or number two, I mean, the other thing we can do is we can take, and I don't know if this would satisfy Councilman Miller, we can take the Articles of Incorporation and we can put this language right into the Article of Incorporation, give it back to you, and you can see it in the Articles of Incorporation. We could do that this afternoon, and you could have it in the Article of Incorporation so that you can see that that's there, or you could wait until the 10th. But you know, those are things that could happen. But I don't believe bond counsel, they speak for themselves. This issue alone is not going to give bond counsel a problem with control.
Go ahead.
I think the council president was wise in the suggestion that we wait until the 10th and we can maybe work on the language a little bit. I'm encouraged by what Mr. Applebaum just said, that this issue alone will not cause concerns about control, so that
And I like the idea of
helps.
putting it in the Articles of Corporation. So I think that might satisfy it in the meantime. All right, Mr. Schrein?
And I apologize for being late, but one of the things you were going to have was bond counsel making that statement as opposed to you being put in that position of.
I just asked
Okay.
bond counsel.
I didn't hear him take the microphone over that.
Bond counsel, will you please confirm that I am telling the whole
Okay,
truth and nothing
all right.
but the truth?
Yes, Councilman Trent, we did confer with Mr. Applebaum and with the law director. And though, as we said earlier, where the exact line might be crossed as to an excessive degree of county control, we don't believe that the county's expression of its intention that these articles include those kind of open meetings, open records provision would itself have that adverse consequence.
So an event that might be contrary to maybe what we would want to have exposed, but the folks who are directing this venue would want to house an event there that might be questionable, and they wanted to keep it under wraps at least until they signed a deal. The open records request, is there any risk that those things would be out there in the public before they would have signed with a contractor to put event?
Yes, Councilman, we're not opining on the desirability of the whether it's politic or not, or whether it might unduly constrain the new entity. The view that was requested from us is, does this reflect a level of imposition by the county of its own preferences or control mechanisms on this entity in a way that would deem it not to be a separate entity from the county? And on that, we're comfortable.
Okay, but it's business operations. Does that affect the ability to place these bonds? If we have put a constraint on the effectiveness of how we run this facility, at the risk of perhaps an event that would not want to be public during its conversational side. Just as we just had this whole conversation about MMPI that was all kept in the negotiating stages until it became public, the same thing might be an event, that we might have events that don't want to be public, and we might, by this kind of language, prohibit a total use of, effective use of this space. And we now are being stewards of the property to make sure we get the maximum amount of revenue from this property. And so I just want to make sure that
Yes.
that anybody buying these bonds doesn't see this as a risk of affecting their revenue stream.
Madam President, if I could interject.
Yeah,
When-
Mr.
When
Grayson.
we were at the CCAO meeting last month, Madam President, if you remember, there was a fourth item that is now permitted to go into executive session, and it relates to economic development matters. And I wonder if this would fall, you remember that? And I wonder if these types of activities that Mr. Schron is speaking of could be deemed as economic development-related activities and then be subject to executive session, so as to not have and to protect the confidentiality that Mr. Schron is speaking of. And that was just past this last legislative session.
Not just that, I mean, the problem is nobody can give you these answers with certainty. You always have a trade secret exemption to the public records. I mean, we protect trade secrets. If you get a public records request, you don't produce documents that are a trade secret. Now, the biggest question always is, what is a trade secret? It has to be information that derives independent economic value from having been kept confidential. So, what information qualifies as a trade secret? And the second you make it as an obligation through the law, who are you giving standing to sue on it and challenge, as opposed to something being in the Articles of Incorporation in and of itself? Then its members, the stakeholders, the people that we appoint to it are the people who have, standing to challenge it. If you put it as part of our legislation, are you opening it up? Are you giving standing to others to start challenging these things? That's, there really is no. I can't give you. It depends on it's very fact specific. What is a trade secret? What is not a trade secret? And who's got standing to ask for it? Who's got are you sort of indirectly giving somebody the right to file a mandamus action against this entity to produce a record of that nature and to have to fight whether this convention that they're trying to keep private, the information about it is a trade secret or not?
Well, I think that we should go forward and consider this between now and the meeting on the 10th. Let's give an opportunity to everybody to review it and get all sides of the picture before we make a final decision. So it's been moved and seconded that we move the amended resolution 2013-0244 involving the termination for the regular meeting for December the 10th for adoption or suspension of the rule. If there's no other questions? Right, the amended, no, we already voted on the amendment. Yeah, we voted on the amendment. Yes, we did. So now we have the amended resolution that has the amount. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of moving this forward to the regular meeting on the agenda for under suspension of the rules on December 10th, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We'll be hearing on December 10th. I think there's one other issue that I want to have talked to Mr. Applebaum address very well. I won't say briefly, but it's a very important issue. My issue of parking, and I think there are some new developments that you wanted to relate. I just keep bringing back that meeting that I was one of the first meetings I went to when I raised the issue of parking. They told me, "Shut up, little girl. You know what you're talking about." And this parking issue is much bigger than I think people have anticipated, and we need to address it.
Thank you. So at this point in time, we're going to talk about the cooperative agreement. And I will say this, by the way, while bond counsel is still here, the last time, now we're on the hotel, and we're on the cooperative agreement between the city, the county, the city, and the port. And I will say this, there was also one question while bond counsel is here. There was a question about the technical reason why the port is involved. I believe that you've received an attorney communication with the technical description of that. I don't know if you had any more questions on that. We have bond counsel here. But that was one question. Now, on the question of parking in the agreement, and as you may know, this came up in the city's deliberations. The last time I was here discussing not just the cooperative agreement, but our plan for the hotel, I told you that we had two related undecided questions. One of them had to do with foundations, and the other had to do with whether we would have parking underneath the building. And these are, by the way, these are related issues. And I told you that even that there are arguments for not having parking under the building regardless of the foundations, but with a certain answer on foundations, the argument, it became more problematic to have parking under the building. Well, the unfortunate news, although once again it's not going to, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter, we're going to work around it, is that we have preliminary results of our foundation investigation. And remember I mentioned to you that one solution is to have a deep mat foundation. And if we had the deep mat foundation, we'd be going down two or three floors, and that created this area where we would have the parking. And so part of the cost would be absorbed by the foundation. The unfortunate news is that given the geotechnical conditions and the structural review, we're not going to be able to go with a mat foundation. We're going to have a deep foundation system, which means we're going to have to either have piles or caissons that extend all the way down 200 feet. Now, we've done that on tall buildings in Cleveland before. The problem with that is there's more expense and there's more time to do that. It also means that we're not going to be digging that hole that goes down basically 2.5 stories where the parking would have been. To say it a different way, to both do that and put the parking in would be an excessive expense. It would cost us at this stage to have that foundation system and put these 280 spaces below the building. The cost would be, the absolute cost would be approaching $10 million, and the impact to the project would be about 1.5 to 2 month additional time. Now, when I say that the absolute cost is $10 million, the relative cost won't be $10 million, because if we don't put the parking underneath the building, we're going to take advantage of that to do some other things. So we'll get some benefits by not having parking. We'll spend some money on the benefit. I would say the relative cost will be $5 to $7 million. Now, we have analyzed this with Hilton. And by the way, I will tell you that urban hotels in a lot of locations, most urban hotels do not have parking underground. Most urban hotels, convention center hotels in other cities, don't even have attached parking. You've been to a lot of cities where the parking for the hotel, first of all, you don't know where the valet parking is, so you never actually know where that is. And most of the parking the hotel cares about is valet parking. Drive-up parking in an urban hotel, maybe across the street, maybe someplace else. We have identified the ability to put parking for this hotel directly across the street in the Huntington Park Garage, and that is a solution. There are other solutions that we're looking into. The immediate problem, when we went to the city, our legislation in the cooperative agreement said that our facility may have parking. When City Council, after our presentation, they changed that to say must have parking within the building. Well, we came back to them, we said, look, we can't agree to must have parking. We told you, in essence, that that was an option, that we didn't know that. And in fact, after their meeting, we had the determination that we likely will not, we're still looking at it, but we likely won't have parking under the building because of the foundation system. We negotiated that, in fact, last night, and what we said was, what we will guarantee you is that within 1,000 feet of the front door of the hotel, we'll have 500 spaces that we'll make available for the convention center and the hotel. And that we can easily do in the Huntington Park Garage. Now, having said that, we are looking at all manner of possibilities for parking. We are looking at, and we've had Turner look at the following things. We are looking at reconfiguring the Huntington Park Garage keep in mind that if we do, we can reconfigure the Huntington Park Garage to get more spaces. By way of example, if we took the top floor of the Huntington Park Garage and made that available to the hotel with a separate entrance up there, and it's valet parking for part of it, you can get 30% more spaces for valet parking than traditional parking. We are asking Turner to look at a direct underground connection to the Huntington Park Garage. There is the possibility you could go to the park, the Huntington Park, next to the Huntington Park Garage, and you could do perhaps what was done at Mall A, which is to say preserve the park, briefly remove the monuments, the park on top, put 1 or 2 levels of parking there, replace what's on top, and you could expand Huntington Park Garage. You could look at other solutions west of the Justice Center, preserve the Huntington Park Garage largely for the convention center and the hotel, and then look at alternative solutions for those people who are in the Justice Center. We have until 2016 to come up with a solution, but I will tell you, even if we put the 280 spaces beneath the garage, beneath our hotel, which is the most expensive and time-consuming way to get this done, we would still have to solve a larger parking problem, which we are now committed to look at these solutions with our own solutions, with the Group Plan Commission, with the city. So this is something that we do have to resolve, but we don't think that the solution, I mean, the most expensive parking you could find and the most limited parking would be to put it directly under this building. I will also tell you that if we can avoid putting the parking under the building, we then have a great opportunity. And the opportunity we have is we can reclaim Hamilton Court. Rather than making that simply a place for cars to go down, Hamilton Court now can be activated. It can be a way to get through from Ontario to the malls and to the front of the to where the restaurant for the hotel will be. We could eventually have retail there, because eventually we're hoping to do more in Ontario. Just in a very quick sketch, here is, and this was something we asked our architect to do, and literally did it with an hour. And so the thought hasn't gone into it, but here's an idea. Here are ideas about what could happen on Hamilton Court. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but
We can share.
Let me pass that down to you. Let me pass this down to you.
Mr. Applebaum, I just want to cut you off right here and talk about this Huntington Garage.
Yes.
There are 2 factors here that I don't know, if these people live in go in the same garage I've been in many times. The Hamilton Garage needs a lot of work. It is literally crumbling. I mean, it's like falling apart. Now, how are you going to take that, garage and rejuvenate it? It's going to take a ton of money. Secondly, we have very serious questions of access to justice. People who come to get their divorce, their adoption, go to probate court, jurors, workers in the Justice Center and in the garage, in the Lakeside Courthouse, all have to have access to parking. And you can't just arbitrarily say, okay, well, we're going to use this for the convention center. We have to have parking for people who are coming for the Lakeside Courthouse and for this building. We have to have places for jurors to park. We have to have places for lawyers and people who are coming to court. And you can't just arbitrarily say, okay, we're not going to use this for something else.
Well, let me
The court can go in and sue us and put an injunction in because they have to have parking. I don't know where these people, they've been building all these buildings. People have to have some place to park. Now, I don't know if you're going to make a people mover to the muni lot or something, but we got serious problems of parking here that nobody wants to talk about. We're talking about at the last minute. We got a building going up and no parking.
Yeah, Madam President, if I can just echo this, I mean, it's difficult now, as I've stated before, for litigants and their families to go to court. They're displaced every time there's a convention held, and even though I'm hearing there's spots open from our public works, there's not. So we have a problem now without even this hotel being built.
Yes.
So there has to be a way to negotiate them to give us money to do something with the existing garage, or go visit the City of Cleveland garage, and maybe there's room there too.
I would have 2 comments on that. First of all, if in fact, as you say, that garage is important and you need it anyway.
Have you been over there?
I have.
Okay.
So let me make this comment. If, as you state, that is an important garage and it's falling apart, it seems to me the county would have the obligation to fix it anyway.
Well, we've been telling them for the last 3 years, nobody wants to listen.
So we all agree, we have to fix the garage, whatever you use it for.
Bonnie says there's no money. We've been telling them for years.
Okay.
Cement falls down on people's cars. You know,
Okay, well, I think that, my point is that independent of the hotel, you'd have to, I mean, no one's going to let the Huntington Park garage go out of service. It's an important garage, so that's.
it's on its way if they don't do something quick.
Okay, well, you'll help us to fix it. So the second issue, though, is I will tell you right now, just with respect to the narrow issue of 280 spaces that we're talking about that would have been under the hotel, we've identified, and this study, this was already done previously, we identified that for the hotel and convention center, that simply taking the people who were in the county administration building that were using that building, that investigation was done and showed that to be about 500 spaces. So the only 500 spaces we're talking about here, there's about 1,000 spaces in that garage. For right now, we're only talking about the spaces that are being replaced or that are no longer used because you're moving the county administration building. Now, I will say this to you, though. Ultimately, this is my belief. It is my belief that we still have a district-wide parking issue we're going to have to solve for parking. If the convention center and the hotel and everything are successful, we have a parking issue. And we are going to have to solve for that. We're going to have to look for some, and it's a good problem. It's a good problem to finally be in a position where there's parking demand in downtown. And there's going to be ways to solve for that. And I haven't indicated all the, we're looking at about 4 or 5 different things that we're going to present to you. I'm not going to present them all today. But there are opportunities, and we're going to have to solve for this. We've already started working with the Group Plan Commission on this. The city's involved in this. We're going to have to be involved with this. But I will tell you that even if you, by way of example, for the Justice Center, even if you went 1 block to the west, and even if you talked about where the entrance to the Justice Center is, if you went 1 block to the west to solve that parking problem, the benefit of Huntington Park Garage, it is directly across from the hotel, so it is the most proximate parking for the hotel and the convention center, and it's there. We're going to come up with other solutions for parking. We have to solve for it. I'm simply saying that spending $5 to $10 million to put only 280 spaces underneath the hotel, you can take that same money and generate a lot more parking and do a lot better within a block. It's just not the right way to go. Not to mention the fact it would delay this project by about 2 months, and we don't want to do that. We want to get it done. And Hilton, by the way, is perfectly fine with. Keep in mind, the parking underneath the hotel would not have been public parking anyway. That would have been valet parking.
All right, Mr. Schrein and Ms. Simon, do you have yeah, because there's nothing on the agenda for this, but it's just informational. But
it's information.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree. I go to conventions around the country, and if you're in downtown Chicago, you don't park inside the hotel parking because it's generally down the street. But as I recall, the number was around $30,000 per parking spot, I think is roughly.
Under the hotel?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it was more than like 60 to 75.
Okay, so 70.
And that was with the old foundation system. It might be
so
more.
at 260 spaces, we're looking, you said 5 to 10 million. Actually, my number is going to come out to about 7.8. So is that $10 million that's not going to be spent on this facility? How much of that would be available to use to help fix the parking over the Huntington Garage?
I'm not.
In the project itself, because in your project number, you had the parking spaces included in the number that we've always been discussing. If those spaces are coming out, and all we're talking about is a different kind of foundation, we should be saving at least a chunk of that could be utilized.
Well, there's 2 things. Number one, what we're also thinking about doing, I will say this, what we want to do is first of all, we want to, if you take the parking out, we are going to have 1 single level of basement. We want to move premium meeting space. We want to develop some more premium meeting space. We have other uses for that space, and we have a plan to do a revenue generator with an executive meeting space down there. We do want to develop the possibility of retail on Hamilton Court. We do want to develop some other things. So actually, some of that we do actually want to put back into the project.
But as a good faith, it would be awful attractive if we're talking about a garage that needs to be renovated to have a chunk of this money that we had allocated to this hotel to actually be used, because it was going to be used for parking internally of the 260 spaces, so it would make sense, it seems to me, from a publicity and a public standpoint, to at least use a portion of that.
I will tell you that the change in foundation system uses, and these other uses a big chunk of that money. This foundation system is a lot more expensive than the MAT foundation system would have been. Once again, I would love it, but we're working with the reality of the budget. And what we said was that parking would be in it if we could afford it and if it made sense.
All right, Ms. Simon, and then Mr.
And I'm not going to belabor this, but that was exactly my point. If, the savings from having the garage underneath the hotel can be used to revamp the Huntington garage and expand those spaces, and that's what we need to look at. I mean, if we're involved with this project, and we need to look at the budget and see how this can get done, because it has to be a joint project, because if it's not, we're going to wind up with a big problem down the road, and we need to do it now, not today, but soon.
The other thing, by the way, we're thinking about is what would really be ideal if the Huntington Park garage is the primary parking. What would be wonderful to do is to actually put to make it first class, to put an underground connection, like you have with the Marriott Hotel and Molly parking. But that, once again, is probably a $5 million proposition. So but that's a long-term solution. It's taking 1,000 spaces in a garage and in the future making it available for convention center. It's a long-range plan. But we're going to have to work through solutions for you. We don't, we're working through those solutions right now.
Well, we'll come back and work on that, but my primary interest is in the access to justice, like our president said, not for people who are going to the hotel to go underground. That's really secondary. They can walk across the street.
Right. Understood.
Yeah, and Mr. Gallagher has a comment, but I also have some concerns about the area west of the courthouse. There's some historical restrictions on that. I dealt with it a long time ago, but I'll just give you a caveat.
We're talking about underground, not on the
Yeah,
surface.
but even, I think there's some problems with use of that land, but you can check that out. Go ahead.
We could look at that.
There's been a couple big whiffs here, and the big whiff was when they built a convention center with no parking. And then the Skywalk going over the Shoreway, and there was supposed to be parking attached to that. What happened to that? Do we know?
Yes. What happened to that was the city had applied for a Tiger grant. The Tiger grant didn't come back.
That seems to
with
be the
that.
vision of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County as a whole, is they blindfold themselves and they swing and hope, and they always miss. And here now we're building a hotel that had parking. Now there's no parking, on top of the fact that we have a parking problem. And I can tell you right now, Huntington is not the answer. Every time we've asked any engineer about Huntington Park Garage, they turn white and they walk away. So there's something going on there. For 20 years, it's been leaking from the roof to the third floor basement, to the point where the third floor basement's been closed for flooding. So it's got to be worse than we can even imagine. So I think the big plan here should be a big parking space somewhere attached to the walkway north of the tracks. And I don't hear anything about that. And
We're not in control of that, but we're asking the group plan commission to come through. Let me make one thing. There's one thing I think I do have to indicate to you. For the convention center hotel, for the hotelier, for the Hilton, if you look at large convention center hotels, what they're concerned about is not drive-up parking. They're concerned about valet. That's how these all operate in large cities. Hilton is not particularly concerned about this because they will have, even if we didn't have that 280 spaces or 500 spaces, they would have contracts available throughout downtown for valet parking.
Well,
And they would get revenue.
believe it or not, I'm not really concerned about the hotel or the hotelier. I'm concerned about the parking, and I have witnessed the parking in Huntington Garage on a normal day of activities in the courthouse with a small event at the old public hall, and all hell breaks loose. I mean, it's incredible. And that's, I'm sure, local people coming in, and it's a nightmare. So that's just a little thing. Now we got a bigger, much bigger situation. So we have a big problem, and I'm hearing little solutions in patchwork. I think you need a big solution.
I agree with you, and I guess my point about that is, and what I guess I was trying to say inartfully, this is really not a hotel problem or a convention center problem, or it is an overall district parking issue. And this is what the Group Plan Commission identified. This is what the city did. You know, I'm not going to say they swung and missed, but, you know, people have been trying to come up with a solution for large-scale downtown parking, and we have to solve for this issue. And
can tell you-
irrespective of our project.
And maybe I'm wrong, but you build a brand-new convention center and you don't include parking, that's a huge swing and miss. And I don't know who
Well,
would,
that's, I will say,
considering you have access to land north of the
yeah.
project. Anyhow.
Actually,
I
on the
think what I'm saying is we need a big solution.
Yeah, but on the convention center, I will tell you right now, it's drawing events, it's drawing shows, they're getting valet contracts. It was not the types of events that MMPI was planning on were not big drive-up events. So it's succeeding without the parking. The point, though, is with the parking, we'll have more opportunities, and as it becomes more successful, we'll want parking. We said from day one that if the project was successful, it would create a good problem, which is that we would need parking, we'd have to solve for it. Well, now we do have to solve for it.
Okay, Mr. Greenspan? Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Did I hear I heard you say that the new foundation system that is now required as a result of, I guess, some core sampling and geological studies is going to cost more?
Yes. It's going to cost more than a mat foundation would have cost.
Do we know how
And it's
much?
going to take some additional time.
And that's what's going to be required now for the hotel?
Well, it's going to cost more than the mat foundation would have cost. Now, we always anticipated the possibility of this, so in our overall budget, we've had contingencies. So it's within our overall plan, but it's one of the many decisions that you have to make. There's various things that occur. We always knew it was possible we'd need deep foundations, and so we looked at a mat foundation solution. We looked at and by the way, we still don't know the final answer because it still could be micropiles or it could be caissons. That's being investigated right now.
So
like every building that's ever been built in downtown Cleveland, by the way.
So in the budget for the hotel, you had a contingency for this built in there?
Yes, there is contingency. The problem is it eats up some of the contingency.
That's where I was going to go. So it eats up the contingency, or does it absorb other features of the hotel that will no longer be an option if this is required?
It's not going to absorb any other feature of the hotel. It's a use of contingency. And by the way, we still don't have, in terms of the overall budget, we're still, we have the 260. We have a contingency above the 260. As I've told you, the ultimate uses and sources, we have to balance. We're still looking at the revenue that we're bringing in, and we're balancing it. But it's not going to, it is within the overall contingencies that we have planned. As you probably know from working with me, because you saw this on the convention center, we always hope for the best and plan for the worst. So we always create the overall budget with a lot of possibilities. And this was certainly one of them. We knew full well that we could very well end up with a deep foundation solution here.
Look, I've got to be careful with what I say and how I say it because I've been very vocal about my opposition to the hotel. But I've been vocal because of my concern of us being in the hotel business. This being a major component of my concern is the unknown because this project is being effectively voted on by this body, and body is committed tens of millions of dollars already to a project that we still don't know what the end result financially is going to be towards the county. And that's one of my main concerns. This just further adds to my argument. I'm not going to belabor it. I'm just going to make that statement and turn my microphone off. But, I said I do that, so let me just do that.
This was a known, but I will say this is not, when we say an unknown, we've known from day one. We have known from day one that this was something that I've talked about, the first time I talked about it, I even said to this panel, that it may be deep foundations, it may be a mat foundation. I talked about caissons, so this is not a surprise. This is simply saying there were one of two ways it would go, and it went the deep foundation way. When we created the budget, we created a contingency that included this very possibility because every building we've done in downtown Cleveland, and I will tell you that most of the buildings we've done in downtown Cleveland have had, with this is at this size, have had deep caissons. Some of them haven't. It's gone both ways. So this is not a shock or a surprise at all.
Actually, just the frame of reference, because I was part of this history. Initially, we always thought that's the case, and actually we sped up the geotechnical study to see if we could do it otherwise, if we could do it by MAT, and the geotechnical study said, no, you can't do it. What you thought originally is actually what's going to happen.
We
So
did the
this is
original
nothing
budget based on deep foundations.
You know, the project is still going to be on time and on budget. This is not going to affect the overall, but.
The original concept may not have had the parking. It was the parking, it was the mat that may have given us some parking. But we always knew this was a possibility.
All right, Mr. Jones and Ms. Conwell, we're not voting on this, so we kind of need to move along. For Health and Human Services.
Thank you, Madam President. I just pulled up a map of the area, and I see maybe 7 to 8 different parking lots in the general area. Tell us, is it your intention, or give us a little more insight into your vision? Are you looking to make a master contract of some type with these parking lots? Is that what your vision is, to purchase parking lots, to just make a...
Mr. Jones, that's a wonderful question, and I think that we can get that information. I mean, we don't have to decide this today. So, I mean, I think we just wanted to raise the point, because we have all these other budget, we have folks out here waiting. I think that Mr. Applebaum probably needs to give us an assessment. Maybe we just have another regular meeting at some point on this issue of parking.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want to speculate when it comes to parking lots owned by others.
Yeah, because the price of everybody's parking lot now just doubled, probably, just by asking this question.
Right. To your point, there are opportunities, and we'll have to explore them.
My other question is, and you've mentioned the city of Cleveland, they've expressed concerns. Speak a little more to if they have been satisfied, where are they in this conversation, and particularly Councilman Tony Brancatelli, who I know...
Yes, we met with them last night before their council meeting, and we worked it out, and Councilman was satisfied that as long as we located, and as I say, and he would have been satisfied with 280 spaces. We said that in our evaluation that the Huntington Park Garage, and I understand the issue of condition, but we said that there would be at least 500 spaces available for the complex there, based on the evaluation the county has already done. And with that understanding, he was satisfied and agreed to support the cooperative agreement. Now, he knows, and everybody else knows, and we've said, and we've been saying this for 6 months now, that there has to be a more global parking solution for the district. That's why the city wanted to do, the Willard Park extension. We don't know if that's the best idea, by the way. That's why we said you really need to do a study, because you need parking. I don't know if that's the best solution. So the city's committed to working to find a district-wide parking solution as well. But he's satisfied with not having parking beneath the hotel.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conwell?
2 quick questions. First of all, Mr. Applebaum, when did you first know about the foundation, the difference in the geological study, and when did you relay this to council?
We learned about it on, what is today? We learned about it at the end of last week.
Okay.
Thanksgiving week. We learned about it at the beginning of last week.
And that was the geological study?
That was the information from the structural engineer, interpreting the initial geological information. So this is less than 5 days old.
Okay. And are the Group Planning Commission considering the factors of the other hotels being built in the city?
The group, as I understand it, what's happened is the Group Plan Commission has agreed to fund a district-wide parking study.
Okay.
They have Desmond involved, and Desmond, they've identified the district, and they've identified that study will incorporate all the current uses and traffic.
Okay.
Our only concern about that, and we've said this to the Group Plan Commission, is it's just a timing concern. We really want this thing to be done sooner, as soon as possible. But they're committed to doing that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, yeah, if there's no further questions on that issue of parking, do you have anything further for us, Mr. Applebaum?
Not today.
Okay. All right, let's get started then we're going to switch chairs here. We're going to move on to item 2013 0229, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Miller.
Do we want to get started, or do we want to break?
I think let's get started, because we have some folks
We'll go
waiting.
for about a half hour, and then
Yes, right,
then
right,
we'll
right.
break for lunch.
All right.
Okay. Committee of the Whole is back in session, and the next item on our agenda is our continuing work on the 2014 to 15 biennial budget, and I would ask the clerk to please read the resolution into the record.
Resolution number 2013-0229, a resolution adopting the 2014-2015 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, we discussed and incorporated a set of amendments relating to general fund agencies into the resolution last week, and our focus today is going to be on the human services component of the budget. And as our chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee, Councilman Brady has taken the lead in putting together a proposed package of amendments which would serve as a starting point for our discussion regarding health and human services. And I would call upon Councilman Brady at this time to move that package and then make a presentation to us on what it contains.
Yes, I'll move the resolution.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have here is what we hope will be a consensus for the council of amendments to the Health and Human Service budget. Some of it is my own work, and then other requests by other members of the council. Some of them have been included. And then there are requests by the administration that have also been included. And so while this legislation is sponsored by myself and Councilwoman Conley and Councilman Miller, it also, I hope, reflects a consensus by the council. And it has been reviewed by the administration. And while I think any one of us, if we did the budget all by ourselves, would come up with something a little different, this is our shot at finding consensus between the council and the administration. You'll see several items. The two big ticket items are first, and that is an additional $4 million annually for the Metro Health System and an additional $5 million annually for the Adams Board. I hope that members understand what a good investment that the Metro Hospital is, particularly given the fact that now we can draw down on the federal government for some 60-some cents on the dollar for every dollar that we spend. And we have language in here that one of the sponsors was very interested in having in here. And also, I would say that the administration was interested in having in here. And the language, that language is in section 2 if you'll look down at the bottom of the paragraph, that these will be funded from the reserves or the public assistance funds and shall be reviewed on a biennial basis for sustainability based on future revenues and expenditures, so that these should not be considered an appropriation that should be expected to be continually renewed, but reviewed as we always do. I'd like to say that the amount that the county has given the Metro system, Metro Health system, has gone up and down over the years. It's not something that has just gone continually up, if that's the impression anybody might have. Obviously, the Metro system came before us and asked for a lot more than this, but it was our judgment that that this would be as much as we could manage this particular budget. I don't care really where the funds come from, and I would really defer to the budget director and the administration to determine where funds do come from. But I just want to remind the members of council that there is some close to $20 million above the reserves in the general fund, above the 25% reserve, which is a very healthy reserve. There is $10 million above the 10% reserve in Health and Human Services. There is $33 million in the Public Assistance Fund, and while we've been drawing down on that over the last few years, I don't think it was ever intended initially to be a fund that would just continue to accumulate and get to the point where there's $33 million setting in it while we have needs. And so that's, and we also have, we will be receiving funding from the sales tax, from the Medicaid waiver, up to something, I believe we were told, something like $7.5 million over the next couple of years. So we do have money along with the additional money that came in from the levy above what we were spending. And so we can't afford this, in my opinion. And I think that it's really would not be well, I don't want to use language too strong, but I think it's almost immoral for us to really set on reserves that are this large when we have so many needs in this community. And so that's my defense for the mental health system. And as far as the Adams Board goes, we had a very strong majority on this council that was willing to support a mental health levy. We did not have a sufficient support for the mental health levy, but we certainly have sufficient support on this council, and I believe that includes everybody that recognizes the serious issues that are involved in drug addiction and alcohol addiction, and the services that the Adams Board provides that are so important to us in that regard. And so that's my defense of these first two parts of this legislation. The Office of Homeless Services came before us and asked for something like $300,000. We're looking at giving them $200,000. Senior and Adult Services, where I've gotten a lot of I personally have gotten a lot of concerned calls over the funding for our senior services, and including particularly the hot meals that they provide. And so I am encouraging the council to try to provide more in that department. And those 5 issues are the ones that I bring to the table, and so I'd be glad to discuss those. But next on the list is an item that was brought to us by Councilwoman Conwell, and then the next one, number 7, the Office of the HH Director, is brought to us by the administration, and so. The Family and Children First Council is brought to us by Councilperson Jones. Did Purnell have to leave?
Yes, he's going to present on his later when he comes back.
Okay.
Shall we call on Ms. Conwell to present on item number 6?
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my initial proposal, it was either for the Senior and Adult Services or the Board of Health. I'm glad that my colleagues decided that the Senior and Adult Services will best benefit for controlling the funds to provide bed bug assistance for seniors 65 and older. There's a great need out there in certain areas. We have public places, libraries, adult centers, that it doesn't necessarily mean that that you're an unkept person, but when these seniors go to these various organizations throughout their day to enjoy the time that they spend on a daily basis, they do bring home bed bugs. And then they're in the incapacity that they're unable or do not have children to help them rid that problem. And it's a devastating problem. We have chemicals out there that have been stated that they are cancerous, and so we no longer can use them, which is allowing the bed bugs to just grow. And CMHA apartments have these problems, but this funding was set aside for seniors that are still trying to live within their homes, not being in a nursing facility or apartment complex, and they just do not have the funding for it. So it's something that the caseworkers or the home providers in DSAS would know about and would be able to properly fund for a resident that's 65 or older that is having this issue. And I've had a couple of issues with the City of Cleveland Department of Health, our Board of Health. No one had funding to actually deal with the situation at hand. So hopefully my colleagues will support this. It will provide a little funding for those that are in the desperate need, that do not have children or live on a fixed income, that live in their own home, that do not have the proper funding to get rid of this issue. Now, I was told that it does not cause any health issues with bed bugs continually biting you, but I would think that it would play on a mental health issue for anything like this, of this nature, to happen to anyone. So this is my proposal, and I hope that support it.
I'm going to present on item number 7. I brought to the council's attention that we've done a number of strategic planning studies in various departments and agencies, such as the one that's currently underway in Senior and Adult Services. But we have not done a system-wide health and human services planning process, which could not only include county agencies, but also partner agencies that we work with in the community to try to get a strategic, coordinated system with less overlap. And so that's what this involves. But also I would mention that Councilman Schron has presented about the need to incorporate business practices into the health and human services system, and Councilwoman Conwell has talked about the need to look into the possibility of creating a single intake process. And this item is intended to incorporate all three of those ideas as valid concepts. So I would hope that my colleagues would support this item. Before we continue on, I'll call on Councilman Schron first.
Chairman, I have an amendment to that item 7 that I've submitted. And part of the reason is that I think that this process, and I've been a big proponent of advocating, looking at what are the best practices and principles. I mean, we had some examples, I think, even in our hearings where we had 3 different groups all presenting on the subject of heroin. And what my question was, what's the coordination, or how is there an overlap, or is there any coordination of concepts or discussions on that? And it did not appear. And so I'm advocating, as opposed to, I've advocated that we should start in this process sooner rather than later, based on this. It's my belief that we should be putting some of the money into 2014 and 2015, so we can start that, and couple with the fact that the state of Ohio has grant money that, if there are funds available for matching contributions, that the state will provide up to $100,000 on applications for studies of this concept. And so it seems to me, rather than wait, it is behoove us to put money, to move money from 2015 to 2014, so as to at least put us in a position to be eligible for making applications for those grant funds out there. So that I'm suggesting that we adopt the one that I've submitted as opposed to the one that's in our packet.
And am I correct that your submission is 100,000 for 2014 and 100,000 for 2015? Is that?
Yeah, it's the same a dollar amount. It just splits it up so that we can make application in the 2014 cycle for the matching grant funds that are available from the state of Ohio to look at business improvements and processes. There are already a number of successful studies that have been done where they've actually used HHS dollars and improved the process, and it's significantly, and I mean, we'd be happy to share that with my colleagues as far as some of the things that have actually taken place in this area, which then obviously, if we can free up dollars, that means that those dollars are then available to deliver services if we can become more effective and more efficient the way in which we do the operation. So rather than wait a year, let's get started on it and start looking at it. And rather than miss the opportunity to receive grant monies from the state of Ohio, it just seems to me that we should be putting some of that into 2014.
Okay, I would like to complete all of the presentations before considering amendments, but we will certainly consider that at the appropriate time. Number 8, we're going to hold till Purnell gets back, and so we're going to move on to the next group of items is, I think, before we hear from Director Merriman, what I'd like to do is to Director Mowry has one set of items, and we can hear his set of items, and then he can be done. So these are items 17 through 20.
Yes, sir.
These are the IT upgrade items. So if you could please present those.
Sure. Again, Jeff Maury, Chief Information Officer. Just for clarification, these are not necessarily new items. These items were submitted as part of the Cuyahoga County recommended budget that came from OBM and the executives. So they're actually detailed in the IT section on page Roman numeral 7-9. So these are in. We're in the initial budget submission. Okay, so these are. I'm not asking for additional funding on top of that HHS IT capital. Item 17 is. We're first looking at, if you look at the way we process intake, specifically in child and support, we're kind of doing it on the back end today. So as the cases come through, there's a very manual paper process that happens on the front end, and then we're actually scanning on the back end. What we're asking for in this case is some funding to build out an IT solution with some automated workflows to where we're actually scanning on the front end to eliminate the paper and to make it more efficient. So that's a part of 17. The other one is we're asking for some funding to do some analytics in a database, specifically on our benefits and
workforce development and our welfare tracking. We do a pretty good job at keeping counts of those individuals and those clients. What we'd like to do is apply some analytics to see if we can start to determine, what is going on as these clients are going through the system. We also have some additional funding for some just routine scanners. We have about 300 scanners total in the agency, so we're asking for some funding to keep those scanners upgraded and replaced. And then we're also in our child care inspectors that are out doing child care inspection, they're using some old heavy tough books. They're about 7 years old, so we're asking for some funding to replace those tough books. So those are the highlights of item 17. Item 18 is we're asking for additional funding. This year we performed a pilot in DCFS with about 20 tablet devices. In DCFS, we have caseworkers that are still going out with paper and pen, so we're looking at purchasing additional mobile devices to make those caseworkers more efficient. In a lot of cases, they have to come back and forth to the office. This would provide both some tracking mechanism and hopefully even a safety mechanism for the caseworkers out in the field. We have some basic conversion. Specifically, this is more pretty much on the IT side. At DCFS, a lot of our systems are running a more expensive Oracle solution. We have very few Oracle support staff, so we'd like to move some of those to a less expensive Microsoft database structure at DCFS. And then we also have some additional funding for laptops for those graduating students that come out of the foster care program in this funding. Item 19, senior and adult services. When you take a quick, from an IT perspective, and look across all of Health and Human Services, our senior and adult services probably have the least amount of systems that will help them track and keep track of their clients. They operate on about 20, what I would call Microsoft Access, very basic databases that don't talk to each other. I would say, again, of all the Health and Human Service agencies, they are probably one of the furthest behind from technology. What we're asking for is funding to build out a case management solution for them, along with electronic scanning process to keep track of all of their documents. On the scanning piece and keeping track of the electronic documents at DSAS, we'd like to take advantage of some software that we already have developed here in-house. So it's a reuse of equipment that we have, and a reuse of software. So those are the highlights. Item 20, Children and Family Services. Those are just some routine server and typical hardware maintenance that goes throughout the year.
Okay, I'd like to see if anyone has questions for Director Mowry. Ms. Conwell.
Yes, through the chair to Director Mowry, the big difference in the senior and adult services, the amounts for 2014 and 2015.
Yeah.
So the 2014, is that basically getting, that's the initial to get the equipment in there and all that?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
the
ma'am.
2015 price would be for what?
That would be just to cover the maintenance associated with the project moving forward. So any maintenance.
And do you have an overall plan for all of these, or individual plans for each of these agencies?
We have individual plans. Obviously, some are, we haven't put a lot of detail into them pending the approval of the budget. But yeah, we have individual plans.
Okay. And I guess it's the reverse in 18 in Children and Family Services, where the lower amount is in 2014, and then we have the big increase in 2015. Why is the...
Yeah, on the 2015 number, I'll be honest with you, that number is a little bit higher than what we had in the original submission. But the thought there was, as we get more mobile devices out there, in 2015, we would look to make enhancements to the application themselves. So as you can imagine, if you're using a laptop or a mobile device, you're really logging onto the system itself. We put some money in the budget to try and improve on the systems itself in 2015. One of the issues we have in this area is we rely primarily on state systems at DCFS. So we're somewhat, from an IT perspective, tied to what the state develops on their end to make these projects work. So in a nutshell, the 2015 number was to look at if we had to make enhancements to any type of interface to down the road after we got the mobile devices out there.
And you talked about the state system. So the state plays a part in all of these agencies.
Primarily in children and family services, senior and adult services, not so much.
Okay. So just in jobs and family services, children and family services?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a coordination, but I know the answer is probably yes, but where are we at with that coordination of?
Yeah, and I have one of the IT administrators here with me today. Our HHS IT team meets on a regular basis. Oftentimes they go down to Columbus. They're part of a user group to meet with the state to try and drive the changes we're looking for into their systems. But I'll be honest with you. I mean, the state serves a lot of counties, so it becomes somewhat of a wrestling match to get priorities done with the state.
So they probably have to be a basic compatibility, whereas.
Councilman Tron.
These are the kind of subjects that obviously I'm looking to explore into a deeper depth as far as being able to look on a broad base. I assume we're talking about iPads and mobile devices and things that have been used by industry for 5-6 years.
Right.
And have you seen where that improves performance and efficiency within an organization because you're bringing this skill and expertise to us, which is terrific. Have you seen where this does result in more efficient or effective operations?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just the simple logic of not having to drive back to the office to keep punching data is, one of the major efficiencies that we have through this piece. One piece that we'd like to explore more that we need to continue to work on, I think, is the safety aspect, is by having a device. And we have BlackBerries out there today, but even our partnership with the Reds community that Councilman Conwell's on, and sharing data between DCFS and law enforcement to try and make our caseworkers more safe, I think is a next phase that we'd like to look at with these devices.
And I can only assume that we're going to look at these as a continuing, you're going to be bringing this forward to us every biennial because technology is going to move. And so we should not be shocked when we start to move dollars from one side of the aisle over to this side of the aisle as we improve efficiency and effectiveness. Is that a logical thing we'll see every 2 years?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you guys have talked about it in some of your previous meetings. We'd like to try and keep this IT capital refresh going year after year. And previous governments that I worked at, we just kind of had a standing capital refresh because, as you said, equipment gets old over time and they need upgraded. Specifically in the children and family services area, and specifically in the child support area, those systems are older than about 10 years plus aged. So a lot has changed in 10 years, as you know.
The data is required to be dumped down to Columbus.
Yeah.
Is the format constrained, or as we move forward into this charter form of government, and we are saying we're cutting a new piece of cloth, is there an opportunity for us to actually be on the lead as opposed to following the state? Because we could take, with somebody of your skill and to be moving into technology, is this an opportunity for us to truly reinvent how we operate these critical services so we could throw off more cash to be doing good things with our services as opposed to administrating our services?
Yeah, I think that if you look at specifically in DCFS, just the challenges that we have between you mentioned it, the data back and forth between the state systems. I mean, we're required by law, and I'm probably not the legal expert on what's required, but I mean, we must use those systems and enter that data. So, our thought is with these upgrades, we can help reach the goal that you mentioned.
And this is why I think a strategic study needs to be done immediately so we could start to move that law ourselves here. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to complete discussion with Director Mowry and then move to a break, and we have Councilman Germana followed by Greenspan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Not that completed.
Not-
I'm sorry.
Yes, we're not done.
Okay.
My point is going to be really brief because I agree 100% with what Jack Schron just said. And last week, I was advocating that, instead of you costing the county, you've been saving the county money. I'm just wondering that in the future, if there's some way to quantify how much in productivity and manpower. So for every dollar upgrade, you probably don't have those numbers now, but I think it would be helpful for us in the future if we get some kind of indication of, by speeding up computers and programs and so on. I know I do it in my own business, where we figure out the productivity of people and how much money by spending we're actually saving. And I think that'd be helpful for future budgets.
Yeah, there's the efficiency piece of it that you mentioned, and there's also the qualitative piece of it, which is, if you think about it, an organization this size that's handling paper, the risk for losing documents, not applying to the appropriate record retention versus electronic, there's a quality aspect of it and a legality aspect of having it all in one concise database. So there's both pieces to it. Yeah.
Councilman Greenspan.
Great, thank you. If I recall, these items were on the executive's recommended additions to the budget, that because they were additions at that point, we decided only to focus on reinstatements, not new programs or new initiatives, correct?
Yes, again, they were part of, if you go through the recommended budget, it's on that area, Roman numeral 7, number 9.
So then it would be safe to further assume that although this is listed right now as a council-driven initiative or budget amendments, but these are really have already been presented by the administration, would also be currently shared upon then as administration-driven initiatives. I guess my point is, council didn't come up with this and say, let's add these as some of these other items may have been conceived. This one was actually through the administration and their budget. Okay.
Correct.
On that point, all of items 9 through 20 on the list are items that the administration recommended.
9 through 20. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you very, yes.
Yes, if I could just expand on one point made by Jeff, David Merriman from the administration. I think while we still have Jeff here, I know there was a lot of discussion around the idea of strategic planning, and Jeff and I were talking about the role of ERP and enterprise resource planning in understanding how human service agencies can be better coordinated. I know the idea was floated as to whether or not intake departments can be merged, and I think that's a direct service area that can be explored and debated. But I do also want to ensure that discussion also includes all of the back office functions that Jeff is fully involved in, and all of the staff that are working on billing, all of the staff that are working on contracts, and that's an area where we are significant time and effort into that process. And so I know that the strategic planning process, the ideas that are listed or been discussed as a part of item 7, are probably going to be more focused on goals or vision or human service outcomes. That discussion must also always track the back office opportunities that we have been bullish on, and we will continue to move forward aggressively on. And so I know that as we move off those items, I did want to make that point, especially as Jeff is here, and especially as he's the one personally managing the ERP process.
Okay, thank you. And Director Mowry, we're not going to ask you to come back for the afternoon session, but we would like you to kind of be on call and close to your phone in case additional questions arise. But we're sure you have work to do, so you're free to go.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, so with that, we are going to recess for lunch, and we're going to come back at 2 o'clock.